Welcome, everybody, to our latest edition of our professional development webinars. We are very grateful to have Theresa Flores with us today. As you know, she was supposed to speak to us a few months ago and got ill. So we are grateful both that she's willing to reschedule and also that she is doing so much better. Um, Before we begin, as per the usual, just a word on the Religion Communicators Council. The RCC was founded in 1929 and is an association of communications professionals who work for and with a diverse group of faith-based organizations in the areas of communications, public relations, advertising, and development. As the RCC, we try to provide opportunities for communicators to learn from each other and to network with each other. And that's really one of the big focuses of why we have these webinars is just to hear what other people have to say, see how we can better our work, see how we can better our communication skills, and just broaden our understanding of some of the issues that are out there. Um, Talking with Theresa a little bit before we started this webinar, she mentioned that she was a little bit surprised that this was an interfaith organization. She thought it was just Catholics. And I very proudly told her that no, we are truly, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is our interfaith aspects of our work. That we have a wide variety of faiths, but also we have a wide variety of communications disciplines. We have editors, writers, designers, photographers, videographers, social media, fundraisers, project managers, etc. It's just a really, really great group of faith-based actors and faith-based communicators, just really trying to show the value of faith in society today. Um, Before I turn the floor over to Theresa, I just want to give you a little bit about her background as well. Um, Theresa is the founder of the SOAP project, and SOAP stands for Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution. Um, she very much is an advocate for eliminating human trafficking. She has presented at TEDx conferences, universities, law enforcement trainings, medical personnel trainings, worked with the U.S. Attorney General's office. She's been on the Today Show, MSNBC, CNN, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she's obviously a great communicator. She's also a licensed social worker with a master's degree in education, which enables her to guest lecture, et cetera. She's written books that have been on USA Today's and the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list. One of them, The Slave Across the Street, received a nomination for an Audie Award, naming it in the top five of all biographies and memoirs. And then most recently, The Girl Next Door, a documentary was made about her life story and activist work. Um, Unfortunately, Theresa knows of what she speaks as well. Theresa is not only an advocate, but she is also a survivor, and spent 2 years basically living a life of being, in forced trafficking. And so we feel really, really lucky to have Theresa with us today. We feel, we're honored that she is engaged in the work that she's in, because she could stay silent, but she's willing to speak. She's willing to tell her story. She's willing to help other people understand the problem that exists in the United States and how we can better talk about it and better do what we can to combat it. And with that, I will give the floor to you, Theresa.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Like you said, I'm very excited that this is open to so many different faiths. I have always believed that it will be the faith community that finally ends human trafficking. And I think that it has to be the faith community that finally puts the pressure on ending demand. And so that's why I'm very drawn to speaking to faith communities, speak to a lot of faith, Christian and Catholic schools, National Jewish Association of Women, just all across the board, because I feel very strongly about that. So What I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you some of the facts about human trafficking, the signs of it, how it happens, but then also give you some recommendation if you're interviewing survivors, what kind of images to use and not to use, what kind of wording. And I will share a little bit about my story as well so that you can put a perspective to it. And so then we'll do some question answer at the end. Feel free to write any questions in the chat as well, but we can take your questions afterwards. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Share, let's see. Okay. And we're going to try and get that big. Okay. Everybody see that okay? Not? Okay, great, great. So this is one of the images that I love to use. It is of a man, supposedly a father, but not necessarily, with a shield protecting a little girl. I do have a version of this that's a little boy from the arrows, and the arrows are all of the demands and all of the assaults that come towards children in what we have today as human trafficking, as sexual exploitation, as sextortion, which we'll talk a little bit about too. And we assume that slavery is over and done with in our country, as we're called the land of the free. But unfortunately, slavery is still alive and well. It's just in a different form these days. There are some organizations and people that do not like the word slavery being used, but it is a form of slavery as well, unfortunately. This is an image that many of you have seen before. A lot of people use this when they're talking about human trafficking or sex slavery, sex trafficking. And it is really a bad picture to use because it makes the assumption that a woman is the only way to be trafficked is a woman's in a cage. It's very sensational. And a lot of times, those bars are on the inside, not the outside. So when we think of trafficking, you might see images like this in Thailand or Cambodia, but not so much for the United States. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen because it does. But generally, this is not the way that human trafficking looks like. So let's start with the definition. Human trafficking is the recruitment, the harboring, the transporting of an individual using force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of forced labor or sex trafficking, commercial sex. Really, all that means is if you manipulate someone, you blackmail them, or threaten them into commercial sex or forced labor. Now, we all know what forced labor is. We have a lot of labor trafficking in the United States, in every state. And a lot of that has to do with our immigrant population. Florida, California, and Texas are the top three states for human trafficking. A lot of that is labor trafficking, and a lot of that is immigrants, of migrant workers that are being exploited. Um, but my focus mostly is on commercial sex. And so that is any sex act. It is escorting, which we also know as prostitution. It can be videos, it can be pornography, it can be stripping, but not all the time. So when any one of those things are done, and it's being involving somebody that's under the age of 18, that is automatically, by federal definition, human trafficking. So if you have somebody under the age of 18 involved in any form of commercial sex, that automatically is human trafficking. There is no such thing as child prostitution or teen prostitutes. Doesn't exist, all right? If the person is over the age of 18 and they have a pimp is a human trafficker. So that means they are being trafficked. This is not smuggling. Smuggling is completely different. All right. Sure, if somebody's smuggled, they can then become trafficked because they're vulnerable, right? But physical movement is not required. So you can have a child, a person in a home, and have men come to her or him all day, all night long. And that's human trafficking if they're being sold, right? So they don't have to cross the border or even a state border. This is not really about sex. And this is another way to show you like why words matter. One of the universities here in Ohio had posted flyers all over that says Teresa Flores is coming to speak on trafficking. And the room was packed, and I asked them, like, why, what made you want to come and hear this, you know? And one young man said, well, I thought you were going to be talking about the traffic problem on campus. And I was like, oh, you got more than you bargained for, didn't you? But he stayed. He stayed and listened to the whole thing. So it shows you that words do matter. This is not about sex. Because sometimes people will say, like, oh, here's that lady to come and talk to us about sex. I'm really talking about money and greed. That's really what this is about. Um, some of the old statistics are that you'll see are that 80% of victims are women and 20% men and boys. We have to be really careful with statistics because they are ever changing. The more and more we speak about this, the more it's out in the media, and we're seeing those numbers changing, which is a good thing. Many feel that boys and men are about 40% now. And as we're having more resources for men, we're having more discussions about sexual abuse of men, then those numbers are changing. They're feeling more comfortable coming forward. But the one number that has stayed pretty consistent is that around 50% of victims of trafficking in the US are children. This is the second leading crime in the United States. That number has not stopped, has not changed since I started this 18 years ago, right? This was some research that Polaris Project did. They are the lead organization in the country, one of the top lead ones, and they interviewed, so you have to also be careful of how many, but you know, were interviewed 127. Now we have hundreds of thousands of victims in the United States. So this was a small representation of 127 that volunteered for this. And they found, you know, about 67% identified as Caucasian. But you do see that there's a wide range of multiple ethnicities on here. This shows you that it can happen to anybody. And a lot of times when we think of human trafficking, we don't necessarily think of a white person, you know. And so this shows you otherwise. Oops, why am I not getting going forward? Oh, okay. So, why would your state, and you all are from different states here, this is consistent, this is what Homeland Security has told us. Why would your state have a lot of human trafficking? All right. So, these are some of the reasons. Do you have extensive highway systems, right? Can you get out of the state within 2 hours? Some states you can, some you can't, all right? So, the availability to come up missing fast, that's the key right there. Large number of truck stops, again, related to highway systems. A lot of times these people are being transported through truck stops. There's a really great organization called Truckers Against Trafficking, and their job is solely to educate truck drivers on what human trafficking looks like. And as they've been doing this, more and more truckers have come forward and helped in the rescue of victims. Um, Universities and colleges. Do you have a lot of colleges in your area, in your town, in your state? College students are very vulnerable of being trafficked. All right. Large immigrant populations. We know that immigrant populations are very vulnerable to becoming trafficked. Many times they don't know our language. They don't know our laws. They have their passports and their documentation removed from them. They're very at risk. So when you have large immigrant populations around you, that can happen being trafficking. Military bases. We know that if there's a military base in an area, the demand for sex for sale doubles in that area. You'll typically see strip clubs. You'll typically see adult stores, 24-hour adult stores in that area. So it kind of all goes together. Same with strip clubs. Like I said, not everybody that's working at a strip club is being trafficked, but it can certainly lead to that. We had a 14-year-old that was rescued out of a strip club in Akron, Ohio. Her father had made her get the job and sat there every night while she worked. So that is human trafficking because she was under the age of 18 and she was working in a strip club. All right. And then if you have a tourist area or casinos nearby, those also raise the demand for sex in your area too and increase the potential for human trafficking. So where does this happen at? Really, anywhere kids are at, all right? We've seen an increase in public libraries, people going there and, potentially being, well, rescues actually out of that. Malls, movie theaters. Social media is the number one way that kids get trafficked. And social media, not just like Facebook and Snapchat, but also like video games. Anything that they're chatting on, any kind of apps, any kind of video games. That's the number one way. But I've met people that have said they were approached by a trafficker in a grocery store in a very rural area, schools, older boyfriends, which is actually my situation. We've seen nail salons or massage parlors, right? Ethnic restaurants, bus stations, agricultural areas, roofers, landscapers, truck stops, hotels. So as you can see, this is a huge, huge area, almost everywhere. You can have potential human trafficking cases. So how often does this happen? Like, how does it happen? When people learn that I'm a survivor of trafficking, they say, "Oh, well, what country were you taken to?" Our minds automatically go to that movie Taken, and they think, especially being an, upper middle class white person, they think, "Oh, you must have been a foreign student, an international student," and none of that is true. Actually, only 3% of trafficking in the US happens by kidnapping. All right. So very small number. Sometimes I've seen on my Facebook page, like people will say, "Oh, there's been this white van at Walmart, be careful with your kids there." And you hear these stories. But again, very rarely does that happen. It does happen. All right. We have hundreds of thousands of victims in this country. So 3% of 100,000 is not a small number. So, we have to remember that it does happen that way, but just not as frequently as what we think. 45% we have found are trafficked by family members. And this is the hardest one. This is the one we're really missing. Children's services, teachers, medical professionals are missing this one because a lot of it is almost half is happening by a family member. I was in a little tiny town in Michigan a couple years ago and speaking to a Catholic high school. And I shared my story with the whole school, ninth through 12th graders. And afterwards, a ninth grader, 14, came up to me and she said, "Miss Flores, I want to tell you, my mom used to sell me to the landlord to pay the rent." Now, that's tough. Like when you hear that, like what are you supposed to say and do? And she said, "But he's in jail now." And she walked away. But I really wanted to know like what happened to her mom, because that's where it started at. So we see this a lot in rural areas. It can be generational prostitution. It can be because of drugs. It can be because of poverty. There's so many varieties of reasons why this one happens. And then 52%, where my story comes into, they got tricked. They were told everything that they ever wanted to hear and they got tricked into it. So these are some of the ways that it can happen, the percentages. Sextortion, hopefully you all know that word, sextortion. It is the number one threat to teenagers today. My story is actually a story of sextortion before it was even sextortion was a thing. And it's where somebody uses images, sexual images, to extort or blackmail teenagers. We see this as a really big problem with teenage males from upper middle class suburbs. leading to mental health illnesses and suicide. When we see that young males are committing suicide, many, many times it's because of this. I call this the wolf in sheep's clothing. And this again is because of chatting online, playing video games, people approaching our youth and making them think that there's somebody that they're not, making them trust them, and then saying, okay, now if you don't do what we say, we're going to share these photos. We're going to, tell all your family and spread them around school. And it's a lot of times we're finding this is done by groups in other countries. All right. We had a situation here in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm from, of a young teenage boy in a high school in a suburb. He was sextorted and ended up committing suicide. Now, several years later, they have actually found and arrested that individual who was the cause of this. And he was from Nigeria. And they actually worked with the Nigerian government and were able to find him and arrest him. That's pretty rare, but I'm hoping that they're getting better at that, probably using AI to help with that. So AI can help in leading these investigations, but it can also definitely make people more at risk. Okay. So the demographics, like who does this happen to? Like I said, whoop, really anybody, all right? But especially kids that might be part of the LGBTQ community, especially if they're from a religious family and they're kicked out and then they become homeless. That's how we see in this scenario working out. People that are from our minorities or marginalized communities, people that live in a high risk area, right? Like a high crime ring area in big cities, if they have any kind of home violence, domestic violence in their home. Maybe a parent is incarcerated or using drugs and there's pornography in the home. 83% of those that have been trafficked, there was incest or molestation involved prior to becoming trafficked. So that's a really huge one. Kids in foster care, all right? Kids that are in abusive situations at home, they run around are running away a lot. If you see suicide attempts or overdoses, these are all signs, red flags of something that might make someone a little bit more prone to being trafficked. Here's a few more. Parents that are on drugs, or like I said, incarcerated, single parents, or maybe they're working many different jobs, unemployed, needing money, right? They have a lack of support system in their family. They move around a lot. There's not a lot of accountability. Kids that are lying about their age or dating much older guys. These are some of the things that we've seen as big red flags. I do a Google search and it's not uncommon to see 14-year-old recovered from a 40-year-old or a 15-year-old with a 35-year-old. And they're dating this person. They think they're believing that this is their boyfriend. All right. And so we see this even in hotels where older men are checking in with younger men and boys and girls. And so that's a big red flag. Red flags of somebody that is being trafficked might be, and I generally will default to girls, but like I said, we know that quite a few boys are trafficked as well. Kids that have low self-esteem, they might have a lot of hotel keys on them, which is not normal. They might have a lot of cash on them. There's usually a per diem that you have to make each night, 7 nights a week to turn over to your trafficker. That can range anywhere from $800 a night to $2,000 a night. So when their trafficker calls them in the morning to pick them up from the hotel that they've placed them in, they better have all of that money. And if they don't have it all, then they're generally beaten. And so they turn all of that money over to the trafficker. They don't get to keep any of the money. I remember doing a conference one time, and there was some pictures of myself when I was younger, and somebody said, "Well, you were really pretty back then. You must have made a lot of money." And I was like, wow, what did you just not hear of this story? I didn't make any money. I didn't make a penny from this. All of it went to the trafficker. Sometimes they'll have multiple prepaid phone cards on them or several cell phones. And so a lot of times people think, well, gosh, you have a cell phone. Why didn't you just call for help? Why didn't you just call somebody and get out of there? It's not that easy. And we'll talk about fear here and mindset in a little bit. They might have all new clothing, right? Their nails done, their hair done. And this is how traffickers earn their trust, especially if it's a kid that doesn't come from very much, right? They earn them by giving them gifts and being nice to them. They start to encourage them to not hang around their friends, hang around me and my friends, and they're all older guys, right? They start doing drugs, drinking, and things like that. You might see a lot of sex paraphernalia, lingerie. Similar tattooing is something we see as well. So these are some of the red flags that you might see on somebody that's being trafficked. The reality is harsh. It's very, very harsh. The reality is that she, again, or he, will have to have sex with 10 to 15 men every night, 7 nights a week, 365 days of the year. The reality is that they will have a 40% higher chance of death than any of you, right? And that's usually by murder from the person buying them, what we used to call the John, the perpetrator, or the pimp, the trafficker. They might die by suicide because they don't know how to get out of this, or overdose. University of Toledo did a study of women that have been incarcerated because of a prostitution charge and asked them, how old were you when the first time was you exchanged sex for something of value? And they found that 77% of adult prostitutes were trafficked as children. They had been sold as minors. So that's why we at the SOAP Project really focus on minors because we know that if we can rescue them out of that as a minor, then they have a better chance of not getting into that field of abuse later. We do know that they will be involved in the court systems, right? The social service systems, the welfare systems, the mental and physical health systems. A lot of times, prostitutes are arrested. People aren't taking the time to see that they are a victim and not a criminal. And so that also leads to warrants that they might not know they have. It might lead to felonies, and then they can't get a job, they can't get an apartment. So they're in the welfare system. They most likely will be pregnant and they can't be a good mom when you're involved in this. So the child might be removed. So you're in the social system, social service system, um, in and out of the hospitals. The abuse is horrendous. So we see a lot of them in and out of drug addiction recovery, ERs. So it's very, very extensive. We also know the reality is that they all will have PTSD, depression, and multiple medical needs. We find we're doing a program right now at the SOAP Project on dental help for survivors. And I have a huge wait list from survivors that need dental help. And a lot of that is because of abuse to the mouth, can be from drugs, can be from not brushing your teeth every day, from not eating nutritious meals. And when I say extensive dental issues, the average cost of what they need, what one survivor needs is between 20 and $30,000 in dental assistance they need, and that's one person. And every one of them is that extensive. So and unfortunately, the reality is that they won't be rescued out of this. I was very lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it, that I was able to escape it. But most aren't. Most will die in this. So why don't they tell? And this is probably the biggest question that I get is why didn't you just tell somebody? Why didn't you tell the police that morning? Why didn't you tell your parents or a teacher? And it's very hard to explain why People don't tell. I guess it's easiest if you think of it coming from what we know now about domestic violence, and that the shame that comes along with that. And so when we think of it in that terms, we can kind of get it a little bit better. But sometimes some of the reasons that a victim won't tell is because they are held in captivity, especially if it's labor trafficking. So sometimes they are held and they're not around others to be able to tell someone. All the time, they are frequently guarded. Even though I was living at home, went to school, and then was trafficked at night, I was heavily guarded, and my parents didn't even know it. I had a part-time job at Burger King, and they would come in and sit there and watch me. If I was babysitting, they could call. They could figure out where I was. This is pre-internet, pre-cell phones, and they would call to let me know they knew where I was. Several of them, my traffickers, were in my school. And so it's very common to be heavily guarded. They know where your family is. They do their homework. They're very, very smart. Um, a lot of times they use the threat of violence. They don't have to have ever hit you. They can just say, I'm going to do this to you or to another person or a family member. And it's enough to convince a child to continue in on it. They use the reprisal of loved ones. There's fear and shame. And then the victims start to blame themselves. I shouldn't have gotten in that car. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. So self-blame, like what we see too with rape victims, is really big on why we don't tell. And we're seeing this a lot with the Epstein survivors, right? Where for many, many years, they didn't reveal it to anybody. And that was mostly because of the shame. A lot of times they don't tell anybody because they don't identify as being a trafficked survivor. And this was definitely for myself as well, where it wasn't until I was 40 years old. Now I have a degree in social work and a master's, and I didn't know that I was a trafficking survivor. That word uh, didn't like I don't know. I just didn't identify with the word trafficked. Certainly not sexual slavery, right? So some of the times we don't even know that's what it is that's called what happened to us. Or they normalize the exploitation. They think everybody else must go through this too, especially if it's happened to them since a very young child. They might be in debt bondage. They owe a debt, and you'll hear that in my case as well. This is particularly with labor trafficking victims, also ones that are being sextorted. Sometimes they don't tell because they're bonded to the trafficker. Think of parent, grandparent, family member, right? Boyfriend. They don't know our laws, our languages. They don't trust law enforcement. They're isolated. They lose hope. Like this is just the way my life is going to be. Sometimes they're addicted to drugs. Many times, this is what we're seeing lately. And there's such a lack of resources for trafficking victims, especially males, that they just figure, I'm just going to go on with my life and just, try to live the best I can. So this is an interesting concept. A lot of times people think of prostitution as the picture on the left. And I just noticed that Pretty Woman is coming out again with number two. And a lot of people think, oh, she has a wonderful life. She's making money. She's got beautiful clothes. She's enjoying this. But that's not the reality, all right? People think this is funny when we talk about prostitution, right? That she made that choice. But nobody makes the choice to be a prostitute. We see this picture of the woman on the right, and you might have seen her in New York City or DC or any big city. And her sign says, tired of prostitution, need money, please help. This is more realistic, all right? Probably what happened is she was a teenager. She might have been kicked out of her family. She might have been abused as a child and met somebody who told her she was beautiful, told her he would take her away from this, he would treat her wonderful, buy her things, and anything was better than the life she was leading. So she said, okay, let's get out of here. She probably went with him, and he said, well, now you owe me. Now you have to pay me back for everything, right? And he kicked her to the curb to make her work for him, right? You see her here with no shoes on. She probably doesn't have a bank account. She has no job history. She probably dropped out of school when she was 16 to go with him. Didn't graduate high school, no driver's license, didn't go to driver's ed, no social security card or birth certificate, probably addicted to drugs, right? It's pretty daunting. And yet we arrest her for prostitution instead of seeing her as a victim, right? And so until we change our mindset and our language and the images we're using, that's not going to change. And this is a good place to start to change that. So these are the components of human trafficking, all right? Let's exploiter, the trafficker, all right? Generally a man, but many times can be a woman as well. And they are going to make money off of selling another person, either for sex or for labor, all right? Very low, very low chances that they're going to get arrested. We see it very rarely. The traffickers are getting arrested and then tried and put in jail for a long, long time. Right? Even P. Diddy got off of the trafficking charges, right? So low risk, high rewards. They making $300,000 a year off of one victim, and they usually have at least four. They're going to go and find a groomer, a recruiter. Think of Giselle Maxwell, right, as a recruiter. And they're because that's the person that's most likely going to get in trouble. And they're going to say, you go find me some victims. And that's the person that the victim is going to trust. All right. And then they find the victim. There are victims everywhere. Since biblical times, since we have had victims of sexual slavery, right? There's always going to be sexual slavery, unfortunately, in our country, because it's there's always going to be victims. And then there's the customer, the person who's buying them, all right? This is what we need to change is the customer part, the demand. The demand for sex for sale. United States is the highest user of pornography in the world, right? And so whenever we talk about pornography, we have to also talk about prostitution and trafficking. The only way to stop human trafficking is if we go after the customer, which is going after the demand. Right now, it's a misdemeanor to buy someone for sex. Unless we change that to major felonies and have higher penalties, this isn't going to change. This is a young lady that I found on backpage.com when it was up and running. Now it's just called something else. And she was for sale for $150 an hour on the escort section. And it said she was 22 years of age. This was here in Columbus, Ohio. Now, first of all, who's taking this picture, right? Um, I imagine the first one up in the upper middle is probably her parents had that taken. She probably put it on Facebook and somebody said, "Hi, you're really pretty." And she said, "Thank you," and started talking to him. And then we see these other photos of her. She doesn't look happy, in my opinion. This is what human trafficking is. We've just misnamed it prostitution. I found her again a year later. She said she was 23 now. Doesn't look happy either now. Looks like she's probably on drugs, right? Again, who's taking her picture? I've never been able to find her. But this is why we're not moving forward, is because people are thinking she is a prostitute and she's actually a child of sex trafficking. These are two other ones that I found again before the Super Bowl, and they were being trafficked as well. These were actual pictures on ads for people of sale for escorting. And then this is the reason I do this. It's for Grace. She's the in the upper left-hand corner. The first photo is this is Grace. She's 15 here. Unfortunately, these are all photos of Grace. From the time she was 15 until the last one on the lower right, where she was 17 and died shortly after that photo. These are all mugshots of Grace, of every time she was arrested for child prostitution. Probably drugs, loitering, a lot of other things too. But we didn't save Grace. We failed Grace. She's dead now. We failed this. And we can clearly see that number one, she's not doing this by choice. Somebody's doing this to her. And you can just see the despair and the abuse on her face. This is what we need to prevent. This is what we need to stop. This is human trafficking. This is what it looks like. Not that pretty girl behind the bars. This is what human trafficking looks like in our country. I don't really have time really to go into my story too much. I can just tell you that I was a normal 15-year-old from a normal family, a mom and a dad. Didn't beat me. I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't molested. I wasn't a runaway. Just a normal family with three brothers. And yet I was targeted because I was vulnerable. We moved around a lot, so I didn't have a support system. And I was taken. You can see my story on on YouTube, on TED, on any of those things. But I was targeted, um, groomed for 6 months, fell in love with this boy, and then was drugged by him, raped, and then blackmailed, so sextorted for 2 years to try and earn back the photos that they had. This was before cell phones, before the internet. I didn't know how to get out of it. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was more men taking me out at night of my home. My parents had no idea, and I didn't know what to do to tell anybody. The threats to my family were huge, and so it really was by just the grace of God that I was rescued and got out of it. I was taken to a motel one night at 16 years of age, and had to service over 20 men in one night, and was left for dead. And the next morning, I woke up and decided that my story was not going to end this way. And I put on my pajamas. I was barefoot. I had no money, no identification on me, no idea where I was. And I just started walking. And I believe an angel is the one that helped rescue me. I met someone that called the police, and I was taken home that morning, and that started me being able to get out of this. But many, many years later, I recalled this night, and I realized that there still were many Teresas, if not more Teresas out there now than there were then. And I decided that I needed to use my voice to try to bring attention to this and stop this. So that's when I created the soap project. And we get people to help us label bars of soap and makeup remover wipes to take to motels and hotels, especially during big sporting events. So we're gearing up for our 15th Super Bowl in San Jose, California this coming January. Um, we have 30 chapters that do this continually all around the country, getting volunteers, mobilizing communities to help go and find these missing kids, because I was missing. If my parents would have gone to my bedroom to see, like, if I was sleeping, I wasn't there. And so we need to find these missing kids, these runaways, because they are being trafficked. And so, I kind of turned that worst moment of my life into something to help rescue others out of it. This is the actual bar of soap that we give to motels and hotels. And so people can purchase these cases of soap and wipes. They can label them, and then we donate them and give them to hotels and motels along with missing children's posters. So this is one thing that people can do. It doesn't matter where you live. This is a great thing for groups to do, for schools to be able to help us with this. We do soap at hotels and motels because 80% of all trafficking is happening at hotels. So it's going online. People are advertising them online, and then they're taking them to hotels and motels for this. Sometimes they live there as well. They're being moved around. This is very transient as well, and it's all around the United States. One of the other things that I get to do is I started to meet a lot of survivors, and I was very surprised by this because I always thought I was the only one. And I kept meeting woman after woman, and now many, many men that had said me too. And so I decided that I was going to start having retreats for these survivors because they really, truly are broken. I was very lucky. I got to go to college afterwards. I have a strong faith and support system now, and but a lot of them don't have that. And so I got some really amazing volunteers together and helped me pour into these survivors. We just took 12 male survivors on a cruise to the Bahamas for 5 days where our volunteers poured into them. We talk about how do you have a healthy relationship ever again after this? How do you do budgeting and finance? Many of them don't know how to do a check. A lot of them don't know how to cook. They didn't get raised like that. We do a lot of inner child work, writing yourself a love letter. They're really hard on themselves. One young man, he was held in a cage for years. I mean, how do you love yourself after that? So this is my favorite thing to do is to pour into our survivors. Each retreat that we have is about $30,000. So it is very expensive, but you cannot put a price on healing at all. As you can see, this one lady on the right-hand side, her name is Joyce. She was actually um, put in jail, incarcerated for life for killing her pimp. She was sentenced to life in prison. She didn't get to raise her two sons. And lucky for her, after 17 years behind bars, somebody saw her case, retried it, and she got out. Now she's a master's degree social worker. She's a therapist. She helps others. But I convinced her to come on this so that we could pour into her and refill her bucket. Um, and it's just been a wonderful thing. Somebody donated this resort trip to us, and that's generally that helps a lot. But you can see like some of the images and the words that you hear before, like slavery, right? Like bars and tapes and chains. They look nothing like this right now. And that's because they've done the work to try and become healed. So we have to be really careful with those words so that people can identify with this easier. One of the toughest interviews that I ever did we'll go, is with Pat Robertson. He sat there in the first 5 minutes of the interview and said, "So I heard you were Tide Eagle, stripped and burned with cigarettes." That was how the interview started. All right. Really bad, bad way to start an interview with anybody, let alone a survivor, right? And so we need to get away from using sensationalism when we're talking about it. We're talking about Epstein, right? We're talking about those kinds of things. We cannot focus on the sensationalism of girls being, clad in, small clothing. All right, we need to see them as a victim and stick to that. Really, what we need is more sheepdogs out there to look after the sheep. The sheepdog protects the sheep, and it actually directs the sheep on where they need to go to be safe. And so I'm just asking all of you to become a sheepdog, to protect our sheep. Because sextortion is alive and well. It's not going to change, but there are things that you can do to stop this. I'm going to go back to that one here. If you have children, checking their cell phones, we've gotten lazy about this, right? Talking to people about sexting, about Snapchat, getting security systems on your house. If you have kids, checking, knowing what your kids' friends' phone numbers are, but also their friends' parents' phone numbers, all right? Checking their bed at night. If you think something is wrong, it probably is, right? Walking down the street and seeing something that just doesn't look right, it's okay to say, "Hey, are you okay?" Right? They probably will be like, "Yeah, I'm fine." But you might be the first person that has said that to them. you might have been the 10th person or 100th person, right? And eventually, maybe they're going to say, yeah, I'm not okay. So trusting your gut instinct is really important on this. Um, you can, like I said, you can label, get some soaps and wipes and label them. We need probably 30 cases, 30,000 makeup remover wipes and soaps for San Jose just for the Super Bowl. We're doing the World Cup in New Jersey in May. So we're always in need of soaps and wipes, donations to help these survivors recover. We have a support group that meets every month with survivors from Michigan and Ohio. So helping get gas cards or airline miles really helps things like that. I just got a Facebook message from a survivor I hadn't talked to in months. And she said she was leaving her abusive husband finally and asked if we had any gas cards that we could give. So we're always getting requests like that. And so anything that people can do is a big help. These are my books. The one in the middle is the bestseller. We're trying to get that made into a movie. And the one on the left is for teenagers on up on what is human trafficking. I know Kathy has read my book as well here. Um, but if you want to know my full story, you can see it online somewhere, but you can get this book on Amazon and educate yourself on this way of being trafficked. So, with that, I think we're going to open it up for some questions. And you can ask me anything really. And there's our email address as well.
So, first of all, thank you.
Mhm.
That was incredibly sobering, but at the same time, I think important to hear and to know. Um, Kathy put a question in the chat, just how effective have the soaps been, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and I kind of after that very, very heavy presentation,
That's okay.
um, is there any good news? Right?
Yes.
Like 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 is there any reason to continue hoping?
Yeah, I think you always have to have hope. If I lost hope, then, you know, yeah, I can't lose hope on this. I have to believe that we can end this. We see lots of phone calls. We see the phone calls to the hotline quadruple every time we're in an area doing a soap outreach. So people are calling the hotline. It might be with tips of somebody that they saw. It could be victims wanting to get help. But we see a lot of people coming out of trafficking now that it's in the news, now that people are associating with it and getting it. So I had a table at a Christian concert one time with our soaps and what we do. And two young ladies came up, probably in their mid 20s, and she said, I've seen this soap. And I was like, yeah, we get around and stuff. And she says, no, like I've seen it in the motel I was staying at. And she says, I just wasn't ready to call yet. And her friend who was with her, she says, but you're free now. And she says, yeah, I am. And so there is hope. There's a lot of hope out there. We just have to take action and do something about it.
I have one more question. I lived in Sweden for a long time.
Mhm.
And in Sweden, they've decriminalized prostitution
Mhm.
for the very reasons that you've talked about, right? But
Right.
they've upped the,
Yeah,
crime rates for the solicitors,
correct.
right? And the fines for that. Um,
Yeah.
do you think that based on your presentation, I think I know what you would think, but do you think that that's an effective way of prosecuting the problem?
Absolutely, 100%. It's called the Nordic model or the equality model. And it's when we decriminalize the person selling sex, right? Because we know that they're usually not behind it, somebody else is behind it, but they increase the penalty for the buyer. So it's illegal to buy sex, but it's not illegal to sell it. And that actually is the best way to do this. Not decriminalizing prostitution, because that means a whole different thing. I just unfortunately don't think that's something that we would ever pass in the United States, unfortunately. But it is the way to end human trafficking.
It not only are the fines increased for the buyers, but it comes to your house in a bright orange envelope so everybody knows.
Love it. Yeah.
Um, so there's that too.
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions. Does anybody else?
Teresa, if you would send me your slide deck, if you're comfortable with that, I would love to include that for folks who are coming on the recording.
Okay.
And then
And
please, the best way for folks to contact you, if that's the info at
Yep.
Project. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I would say if you have a